Hi everyone, my name is Matt West. I'm an engineering manager and a technical architect here at Forum One, and I want to talk to you today about AI bot crawlers and how they're breaking government websites and what you can do about it. So, for those that may not know, when we use the phrase bot is short for the phrase robot, which is just a little computer program that somebody has written, and the purpose of that program is to do something automated that normally a human could do, but it would take them much more time to do. Bots have existed on the internet for the entire time the internet has existed. We are most familiar with bots because we're often tailored to like Google's SEO search bot crawlers. We use bots for like legitimate things, status monitoring. Companies like Pingdom and StatusCake provide a bot-like feature. Archive.org is another example of a bot that is something we would classify as a good bot. The challenge is that there are a number of bad misbehaving bots. And up until recently, most of those bad misbehaving bots were searching for security vulnerabilities, or they were participating in distributed denial of service attacks to actually target and take down websites. What we've seen over the past year or two is a new problem with bot technology, and it's kind of all the result of AI and large language model startup companies because they're trying to scan the entire internet, parse it, collect all the data and content so that they can train their learning models. And they're just crawling way too aggressively. So what we have seen over the past year or two here at Forum One is all of the popular AI startup companies that I think most of us are familiar with, such as OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity. We've seen them appear in our web server logs and occasionally causing disruption to our client websites. Their crawlers will ignore robots.txt, which is a common file used to instruct crawlers on where to crawl a site, on where to find targeted interesting content, and also to restrict them from content where we just don't want automated traffic to go to. And normal, well-behaving bots, search engine bots, Google's crawler bot, Bing bot, they all do a good job of respecting robots.txt. These startup AI companies over the past year wouldn't. And they would just blow right through and they would do a link scan of the entire website. And they would crawl way too fast, not respect any rate limiting, and just cause a number of problems that would effectively result in a distributed denial of service attack. It would have that type of effect on some of our sites. This has come from not just AI startup companies that we're all familiar with. Like this isn't just an OpenAI or a Claude bot problem. We've had a number of problems from offshore foreign countries, Alibaba, for example, from China. We've had a number of incidents which really do look like distributed denial of service attacks in the way that they're orchestrated that we've never really been able to get to the bottom of the source of the traffic. So the biggest impact of all this aggressive bot crawling is really just that it's too much traffic for our infrastructure and websites to handle. In the case of Drupal, there are a number of layers of caching that we can implement on Drupal to make the site performant, but the infrastructure can only handle so many web page requests in a few minutes before the infrastructure is overwhelmed and the experience for all legitimate users visiting the site, content administrators that are logged in trying to edit the site, degrades to the point where the site is awful to use. And in some cases, it just goes offline and it's unreachable. Also, this flood of traffic has caused expenses to our clients by triggering hostage overages. Our hosting packages are designed for a certain amount of monthly and yearly traffic that we expect and is based on reasonable real-world historical data. We have had incidents where the flood of traffic from these automated crawl requests has blown through our traffic limits for the month, and it has occasionally resulted in costs that our clients have had to bear. So at Forum One, we've implemented a few different detection and mitigation processes in response to this. The most effective that we have found is to stop some of these sources of traffic right at a CDN layer or a web access firewall WAF layer. Cloudflare has been really helpful for a number of our clients. Akamai has as well. There are other CDN and WAF tools out there that exist. I'm just not familiar with those. I'm most familiar with Cloudflare. And Cloudflare seems to be one of the leading network companies that has really taken this challenge and this problem head on. They have several bot attack features in their interface that we can flip on at any notice. And they have rolled out new basically bot mitigation and bot scanning techniques to stop traffic right there at their CDN layer. That is the most effective way that we have found to block this traffic, but it always comes after detecting an event that has come in. And the way that we have now set up our infrastructure and our websites is an additional service monitoring tools that will monitor the transaction times of pages, platform resources, things like that. New Relic, Blackfire.o, those types of tools have been handy for us to create basically monitoring rules so that we get pings on Slack, emails, whenever there's a certain amount of basically excess activity, excess load on the website over a certain amount of time. When we get notified about that, usually we go into our response time. I will say that it also occasionally a client will just notice that their website feels slowish and feels sluggish. That is also how we are often alerted about some problem, some potential a crawl event across their website. So whatever draws our attention to the problem, that's how we end up going in. And the first thing that we will do is we'll look at Cloudflare or the CDN tools to show log analysis of the web traffic that the website is receiving. We can also look in New Relic or Blackfire, but those tend to just give us too broad of a like a transaction stack. That is, we've just found it more useful to go into Cloudflare or Akamai and look at the log analysis through that interface. And what'll often be useful there is to find which pages on the website are being scanned over and over again. With that information, we'll go directly to the web server's access logs, download them, and scan through them to get the raw actual logs. And what we have found is that in some cases, the requests are spread across hundreds of thousands of different unique IP addresses across different countries and different continents. And each of those individual IP addresses are really only responsible for 1, 2, 3, only a few events. So what we're finding is that these AI crawlers, every time they crawl a site, they don't necessarily just come to the homepage of a site, grab the sitemap, and then start scanning through each URL. They seem to come into the site, somehow get an initial scan to gather the sitemap, save it, and then they come back at some point in the future and distribute the actual scanning, page parsing across all of their clients. This makes it really challenging to actually block some of this traffic because we're used to kind of going in and setting rules to block IP addresses, maybe whole networks. We found ourselves in a situation where we were having to originally just block entire countries, to entire regions. If we had a website for a state, one of the states in the United States, that we expected legitimate traffic, really our main target audience is only members within that state, certainly only within the United States and in the continental United States. In the past, we would just block all clients from outside the United States, which was pretty straightforward and easy. Unfortunately, there are times when legitimate users, legitimate visitors are outside of the United States, and that would cause problems that we would have to whitelist later on. So what we have found to be useful is to use Cloudflare's roles to identify certain specific thresholds. So Cloudflare has a tool, like I mentioned earlier, that are really handy for bot detection that we have rolled out that has helped us target certain URL patterns. And that has helped mitigate some of the problems that we've had with AI bot crawlers. I will say, in addition to not being able to block by IP address or by even country, we also cannot block by simply user agent strings. In the past, for the most part, bots would identify themselves in the user agent string of their web request. So we would see all the different small companies, small scripts that would identify themselves in the user agent string. It has seemed to be now that many of the bad actors that are coming in and crawling our websites too aggressively are just spoofing their user agent string to look like a legitimate web browser. And so we can no longer just filter or rely on web browser user agent string data. Because that's not real data. Any client request can spoof that in. They can put whatever value they want in that request. So we can no longer trust the user agent string. We have to go by these more sophisticated tools that some of the CDN and WAF providers provide us. Okay, so that's one of the major ways that we've been dealing with mitigating traffic at the network layer. There are situations where we've had clients that don't have access to a CDN or a WAF for one reason or the other, and we have to immediately find other ways to deal with like a site basically being down because of all this flood of traffic. The main ways we've done this is to fine-tune, to make sure that Drupal is fine-tuned as much as possible, so that all the available layers of caching within Drupal are tuned as good as we can get them. For example, we make sure all of our views are fine-tuned. We make sure that we have Redis memcache services available and tuned up to have the maximum capacity allowed. We've had to rely on database caching for certain Drupal cache bins from time to time. That's also helped. We always, of course, make sure that the bare base in Drupal dynamic page cache is enabled, and making sure that any query-heavy pages, we've had to fine-tune them a little bit. We'll try to remove views that are too dynamic, lower impact things on static pages just to make pages load better. But the biggest challenge that we found with our Drupal pages are specific to search listing pages that tend to get targeted by these crawlers. They must use them as a way to go through the sitemap. And a lot of our search pages use the facets module to filter content by taxonomy, date, other tagging type abilities. And the facets module by default, creates a dynamic page route. And when you have several search pages with dozens of different facet values, the combinations of unique URLs is however many long dozens, hundreds of unique URLs. And those are what end up getting captured by these bots that crawl the site and cause them to repeatedly target and request those URLs. Because those URLs have large combinations of facet parameters, they're all unique and they don't exist in page caches anyway. So they end up being all uncached requests. They all come in very quickly, and they really hammer Drupal's backend because it's trying to generate and process fresh pages with no cache. So there are Drupal modules that we've flipped on to improve that feature. It's the facets pretty paths module, which helps that. That creates nice looking URLs for facet request pages. And I have to give a shout out to my colleague, John Brandenburg, who has developed two custom two contributed Drupal modules to also help with this problem. One is called the Facet Bot Blocker module that actually will block all traffic if requests come in with more than a certain number of facet parameters. Because we realize that most legitimate users are not requesting pages with more than one, two, maybe three selected facet options. For the most part, all of our legitimate users only select a few or they just use the keyword search altogether. So John's Facet Bot Blocker module will automatically return either 403 or 404 requests and shut down the Bootstrap page altogether whenever it gets those patterns of requests that it identifies as a bot, basically trying to search for too many facet patterns in a URL string. John has also developed a bot blocker module that allows site editors to define a rule set that blocks bots within the Drupal administrative UI. This is something that's useful if you just, again, don't have access to a CDN or a WAF, a firewall, web firewall. There are other Drupal modules in the contrib space that do kind of also help with some of these. Fast 404 is an important module that your site should always have turned on. We also have the anti-bot and honeypot modules that can apply rules to different form pages that a bot might also want to target, search pages, things like that. And there is a low-tech solution in Drupal sometimes to these crawlers. We have noticed that crawlers will often only target one or two of our search pages. For whatever reason, they target one or two high-value search listing pages, for example, just /search, and then that route has all of the different facet parameters, facet options that they target. We found that even a quick way to handle disrupting these requests is to change that URL path. And then at the Drupal layer, configure fast 404 to return a 404 for that route. And of course, update the URL path in the actual site's menu so that legitimate users that browse the site can still access the page. So for example, if your search page has the path /search, we change it to /site-search and update it in the menu. And then immediately go to Drupal's Fast 404 module and write up a configuration to block requests to that and return 404s. And then in some cases, you may not have access to a CDN or a web firewall, but you might have access to the Varnish web server configuration. And a rule could be added to Varnish to block requests to that path as well. It's a low level, not the most sophisticated way to handle these, I'll call them bot crawl attack events, but it does work. And it is a quick way if it's the middle of your day, you're not getting a response from certain stakeholders, you're having trouble getting a response from whoever is the Cloudflare administrator, things like that. That is a quick way that you can respond and block some of the traffic that's accessing, if it's accessing one route over and over and over again. Okay, I've been talking quite a bit about how we block traffic from AI startup companies that want to scan our client sites and pull their information in to use it in training data. But, there is a question of whether you even want to do this and when you should allow or maybe want to allow these crawlers to actually browse your site and consume content, assuming that they are behaving responsibly, the request rates are reasonable, and they are identifying themselves, and they're not getting stuck in a loop or causing, cache misses, things like that. There may be cases where you do want to allow some of these crawlers to browse your site in the same way that you would want Google's SEO crawler, its search engine index crawler, to browse your site, because you may want those crawlers to index your site in their responses of their AI, of their LLMs when they return content to users. It is likely that in the future, fewer and fewer people are going to be going to their search engine of choice, Bing, Google, whatever, to search for content. And there could be a world where Users are getting a ChatGPT prompt in their browser that they just type things into to get the answers that they need. And those services you may want to consume your website content, because your website content, especially if you're a state or federal government, is a source of truth for that information on that topic. So, there is a reason that you may not want to just block everything wholeheartedly across all platforms. It's really up to your agency and your decision. So one thing to keep in mind is that you maybe just don't want to block everything. There is the advantage in Cloudflare that its web access firewall configuration and its rules can show its managed challenge JavaScript feature to users, and that tends to do a good job of making its content available to legitimate users. And some LLM clients can parse that, which is its own challenge. But there may be cases where you can configure your CDN to slow down the rate of traffic rather than just block it altogether. Okay, so some takeaways from this whole thing is that, these crawlers, I don't necessarily think that they're malicious, but they have certainly been disruptive at times. There's like a moonshot for content and moonshot for data amongst these startup companies. And they just occasionally don't care. They don't respect the robots.txt or any other standardization for requests for crawl management or any rate limiting. So, there are going to be times where all website managers are going to have to respond to these challenges. And these are the tools that you can use to do it. Layers and layers of caching. You can set bot rules in your CDN or your WAF or in some of these Drupal modules that I've identified. And you can keep all these in Drupal configuration so that you can make them portable if needed. So this is going to be my talk. This is what we're going over here. The landscape of how AI crawlers are really causing headaches for some of our different websites. I'll be giving a talk about this at Drupal GovCon next week. It'll be Thursday morning at 9 a.m. and I hope to see you there.